Alrighty, I hope that this video finds you well. I wanted to talk about the Remote Chess Academy and their new video on how to crush the Caro Con and how it's the same dog water that everyone seems to be peddling. It is 14 minutes where there's actually about 30 seconds of it seems to be useful or relevant or even plausible to be useful. I don't understand how you can say that you're going to crush an opening and then proceed to show this. So first, he shows the two knights. Two knights of variation of the Carcon. It's a fine opening. Fischer played it all the way up to Ferrugia, Magnus Carlsen. Everyone's played it. It's a fine opening for white. However, it's much like how I've really been vehemently proposing it's nothing special. It really isn't. If you want to crush white, you need to play the advanced variation and probably the short. Like the advanced short variation is probably your best bet. The quick knight c3 g4 ideas can also be a little bit dangerous, and if you're going for really rapid time controls, probably playing the tall variation with a quick h4 in the advanced. All those have the advanced in common. Anything but the advanced variation, you're probably not going to be challenging black at all. And these lines are so borderline ludicrous that it's tantamount to intentionally lying to your viewership. The first big issue that I have with this entire video is that it really goes over two main lines. D takes, which is now more of a fine move than it was about 20 or so years ago. People would say that this is stupid. It makes no sense for black. Or bishop to g4. Now he goes over these two lines, and these are definitely the top two lines, and then he just completely just waffles knight f6. It doesn't exist. This isn't a line. No one plays this. Unless, of course, you're Grishchik or Anand or Ding Liren in 2019, or Grishchik again, or Ding Liren again, or Grishchik again, or Hikaru Nakamura. This is a line, and white must be prepared for it. But instead, about 2 minutes into the video of this guy explaining to you the greatness of this line, we start off with the exchange. Now, why do we start off with this sort of like exchange? Well, it's so that way we can fall for this again. No one's falling for this. No one cares. We've seen this a billion and one times. It's nothing revolutionary. It's nothing. You can see, I don't know if you can see in the master database, the master's database, this has been reached 791 times. And can you guess how many times grandmasters fell for this? The answer is 0. No one's falling for this. I have a student whose rating is 300. And I showed him this position because I thought it would be fun. And I was like, now, what do you think black should do here? And he said, I think, because he had the white pieces, he said, I think black should play knight bd7 so I can checkmate him. My 300 rated student knew this. Who's this video for? Every move's a trick. And the biggest trick of all is that you watched the video, because every move is not a trick. Now, again, we could avoid all of his quote-unquote tricks with just knight f6 and white's out of their book. But let's assume that you like d takes. We'll tackle this one first. And let's assume that knight f6, which I think is probably the appropriate best move here. So queen e2, he goes for this. Now knight takes, he does mention this. Good for him. And then he mentions knight bd7, which is the top sort of like move. He ignores queen d5, which was popular in 2014 through 17, 18. He ignores it because it's hyper solid for black. White has no tricks here, or nothing. Like, it's actually difficult for black to blunder something here. I mean, I guess he could show something like, I don't know, here, and like c4, and I don't know. Like, his tricks are so awful that it's not even tricks. They're not tricks. They're not traps. It's just black just straight up just blundering away a piece or a king. But you know what? Queen d5, I think that's boring. You know what I like? I like queen a5. Queen a5, this is the more topical, more modern approach. You can see Mamedyarov played it, so you know that it's going to be fun. Back in 2022. This is more of the modern. This is what people play now with the black pieces. And why doesn't he mention this? Well, if we look at the database, bishop c4, his recommended move, White's getting trounced here. I mean, 50% of the time he's drawing, which it looks like he's escaping. Now, I'll give credit where credit's due. If you follow this sort of like roadmap, you should be actually fine with the white pieces. Bishop f5. Now, I face this online more than anything else. And this is where black actually runs into trouble. The issue is that this bishop kind of doesn't have anywhere that it can go to. Also, you won't learn this in his video, but one of the key ideas in white in this pawn structure is he wants to go c4, d4, and then he wants to break with the quick d5. But you won't learn that in his video because we're just going over tricks and traps and zaps, and who cares about anything else? We don't want to actually learn how to play chess. We want to learn how to play these tricky stuff that no one's falling for. Anyway, queen e2, which I think is the most sound and solid move. Yes, white did move their queen a lot in the opening, and yes, he did break those opening principles. But luckily for white, he has now reached equality. Congratulations, you've reached equality with white pieces. And this is the best that he can probably get here. The news doesn't get any better for white because now white must find a creative way to justify his play. Black doesn't. What he needs to do is just play normal stuff. Bishop to e7, knight bd2, castles kingside, and then if your queen ever gets attacked, bring it back to d8. Actually, if you finish all that other stuff, you can just bring it back to d8 anyway and ask white what he's doing. What's important here is that you just ask white what he's doing. Eventually, you're going to break with c5 because that's a key pawn break for black. You can also prepare the c5 break by going a6 first. You can go a6, b5, and then c5. That's also another way of doing it. And there's plenty of different ways that you can do it. You can slow roll it. You can do a bunch of different things. Anyway, say castles. It makes a lot of sense to me. Knight bd7, bishop e7. It's all going to just kind of transpose. d4. I saw in here that d3 had been played. Like people were playing this in different sort of line. d3 makes no sense. I mean, it defends the undefended bishop, I guess. The semi-defended bishop. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, the only thing that white can say in this position is that he has some space with the d-pawn. Bishop to e7. Again, just follow this roadmap. Castles. And the engine now wants to make moves like h3 and c3 and a3 is also another one of the engine moves. That's not a good sign. The engine has nothing productive here. If the engine has nothing productive here, what do you think a human's going to do? Well, c3, I mean, why not? Defend the d-pawn, keep your space. We centralize a rook. They centralize a rook. And you know what? Centralize the other rook. What's white doing here? a4. This is a game that was played. Looks like black was 25-41. Pretty good, strong player to follow. So his opponent played a4. He went bishop to g4. He wants to, that bishop's sort of undefended, so he sees the writing on the wall. He doesn't want to get hit with tempo, so he says, okay, I'll defend. And then this sort of gets awkward. Now, I should say, I don't think black has anything here. But white's never winning this. He went a5, a6, h3, ruined his pawn structure. You know, white says that he has the bishop pair, but he has no way to really do anything meaningful here, which is pretty much what ended up happening. This knight oftentimes finds itself pretty useful, trade off the extra bishop. Like, nothing's happening here. Only white can lose this game, but he would have to work hard to try and lose. Like, as long as white just sits and does nothing, he should be fine. He should never lose. but only he can. Like, black's not losing this. So that was a thing. Like, these are all very reasonable, like, sort of like ideas. I just don't see, there's just nothing here that's really crazy frightening. Just to illustrate, let's show Queen F4, which is what I face the most. If we go into my database with the black pieces, I faced this 42 times, e6. They castle most of the time. I just go bishop to e7, following the same exact roadmap. C3 seems to be a common thing. D4, sort of like transposing. It's all sort of like the same thing. There's nothing happening here. Just follow basic sort of stuff. Again, D3 was a move that was played here, and I can't rightly tell you why you don't want to go D4. I can't. Anyway, maybe we should go with C3, just what I have in my notes. D4, just castles. And I liked, you can go Rook Fu1 first. I liked the unprompted Queen D8. And all that you're doing is you're saying, hey, this knight's kind of dumb. And it has no, one of the ideas for white is to maybe trade off this knight for this bishop and then say, hey, you know what? Or the bishop drops back here and say, hey, you know what? I have the bishop pair, so I have something to play for. But we even just say no. Now, the drawback of this Queen F4 line for white is the very simple fact that his pieces, these two pieces, are simply misplaced. So this queen sort of hampers this bishop, and this bishop doesn't have any good squares. Going to d2, it's like it's developed technically, but it's doing literally nothing. You just spent a move so that way your bishops or your rooks are connected. And it's even worse here. Like, yeah, your rooks are connected, but now this rook is on the semi-open file and you're just blocking it. You really wish that this queen wasn't here and you could go maybe bishop f4 and, you know, maybe even you could consider doing something like this. Maybe put the bishop on e5, be annoying, and maybe you can trade it off. But the queen's sort of misplaced. The second thing, and I think the more fundamental flaw in all of this, is that this light square bishop over here is sort of preventing the actual key idea, the only real idea that white has, which is c4, d5. And it's hard to do, and it's hard to come up with. If you don't know that this is really the only real key break that white has, it's hard to find over the board because you've already played the c-pawn once, and when you play it again, this pawn sort of looks a little weak, and it's a little counterintuitive to come up with on your own. This guy played bishop to b3, which, I mean, it makes a lot of sense whenever we break down the actual key ideas. You know, white's 2400 here, so very strong, very good player. Knight f6, knight e5 makes a lot of sense. Knight d5, we talked about how this is a key square that we oftentimes want to do. We tickle the queen, and he doesn't want to give up his bishop because that's kind of his only thing. And this exchange is almost never good. You would take back with the c-pawn. Pretty much always take back with the c-pawn. And now we have ideas. You have ideas with like the minority attack. Ideas that kind of weren't there before. And he doesn't want to give up a bishop for a knight for just no reason. So the queen's misplaced on f4, so he goes queen f3, right? And now he can move his bishop. Now he can do all the things that he wanted to do before. It's still hard to do. So bishop to d6 makes a lot of sense, and he kind of doesn't want to go here because then he loses the bishop pair, and it's kind of hard for him to argue that he's better without the bishop pair. So he makes bishop d2, connecting the rooks. Black asks, hey, why don't you trade light square bishops or put your bishop on this awful square? He says no. Well, he put the bishop to there. It was defended. It's not defended anymore. We attack it. Queen d1. Now, how many times has white moved this queen? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, black moved his queen too. 1, 2, 3. Well, that doesn't matter anyway. Let's look at piece placement, piece activity. This knight is attacking some pawns and stuff. Looks pretty good. This bishop's attacking this knight. Looks pretty good. This bishop's doing nothing. Rook's not really doing. Queen's defending. Attacking. Okay, attacking. This at least has some scope compared to this one, right? Like this is not a good position for white. The ancient says it's about equal. It gives 0.2 for white. And it says that with this sort of like threat that there's something here. But I'm not fully believing it. It's difficult to find that this is good. And it ended up being a draw. This game did, but if you don't understand the fundamental pawn breaks, you're not even going to find half those moves, which most of the time my opponents don't. But you know what? Let's say Queen A5. None of that's for me. I don't like any of that. I don't want to learn Queen A5. I really, really, really want to play Knight D7, just like what was recommended. Fine. Let's follow his roadmap. Bishop C4. Knight F6. All the stuff that he's recommending, and he says Queen E2. And he says, hey, you know what? Now you get this cool attack. It should note that everything's zeros here, except there is one move that's bad for black, and pretty much only one move. This is 0.5. This is 0.4. And this is loses on the spot, and it's the pretty close to the only move that loses on the spot. I mean, I guess this is pretty bad too. But you have to go to those kinds of extremes to find something. And that's how no other move is discussed besides this move. This is the only move that he discusses. And then he says, oh man, you know what, you're crushing. And if you go into the Masters database after this, 21 games in the Masters database. And literally no one has ever played bishop to G4. Just play regular stuff, man. If they just play regular stuff now, what is white supposed to do? Well, let's follow his roadmap. Let's follow ours. We just do the regular sort of like Caro stuff. I don't know. Maybe here and bishop to D6, bishop to E7. Let's go bishop to E7. The engine says bishop to D6, but let's just say bishop to E7. The engine wants C3 to defend and control the space. And this looks really familiar to what we had before, except we didn't waste the time. This looks fine. Although the queen is better here than it is on F4. So he can probably get in his bishop over here. And the engine wants bishop D6. It also thinks knight D5 is fine. Any reasonable move is perfectly fine here. White has nothing. There's nothing here. And the pawn breaks are the same ones that we discussed earlier. Ideas of like B5, A6, C5. Maybe bringing the rook out. Maybe an early C5 is also an idea. Remember that the knight's strong here. This looks like a fine move. I don't see anything wrong with this. You know, and if we looked at that last game that we looked at with the Grandmaster, he played bishop G4. I don't see why you don't play bishop G4 here. I don't see any issue. You know, I don't see any issues with this. Like, where's the attack? He's going to checkmate me. He's never going to checkmate you. And now his queen goes back to E2 again because he wants to move the queen 9 million times and then say that that's somehow winning. There's nothing here. And he explores none of this. He just explores the one way that black can blunder. And every other reasonable move, it doesn't exist. Full of traps. Full of traps. It would be the same as me saying, hey, you know what? This is really full of traps because, you know, he can go knight D4 here. And I can just win the knight. Super full of traps. You see like how trappy this opening is? Oh my goodness, man. Super trappy, you know? Or maybe he can go here, you know? And then boom, all of a sudden you can win the C-pawn. Oh, this kind of looks a little dangerous to me. It wants queen A4 and then it says black's better. This is actually a little sketchy, but full of traps. Full of traps. Dog water, man. Dog water. So there's no issue with this line. Well, maybe the other lines. Maybe the Remote Chess Academy has created a video that's super relevant if you play this, the old main line. Now, bishop e2, I think this is a good move. I think that this is very fundamentally sound. I think that it's a very strong move. It develops peace. Why bishop e2? Do you know, as the white player, why he put the bishop on e2? It was to break the pin, right? That's the reason? Okay, yeah, sure. That's the only reason why you put it there, right? No other reason? Okay. e6, like what's recommended. And then, now he recommends knight f6. Fine. I used to play knight f6. And then I found bishop b4, and I saw that in the master's database, this is just utterly crushing. Like, white's never won here. Black has won a lot. And there's issues. It's really easy for white to, sort of like walk into stuff. White breaks the pin here. Well, maybe we should break the pin here. That makes some sense, right? Well, boom, 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 and this is awkward. But it's not awkward because of how we win the pawn, because he's probably going to win the pawn back. If white gets compensation, he has the bishop here, blah, 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 blah. The issue is that this bishop is just a tall pawn. You remember how the knight was on c3? The knight's not a great piece on c3. It's really not doing too much. The bishop on c3 is even a worse piece on c3. It's just a tall defender. It's not doing much either. Probably the best that white can get is something like this, and we're not worried about giving back the pawn. We don't care. Really don't care. Because this bishop, we're playing against this bishop. Let's just assume we get into like a position like this. Should white trade queens or not? Well, you wouldn't know because you're a Remote Chess Academy viewer. They don't talk about this kind of stuff. You know what they talk about? They talk about opening traps. Let's say that you trade the queens. This is probably strategically dead for white. He still has drawing chances here because it's good knight, bad bishop. If the rooks come off, this is dead lost. An engine can probably hold this, but a human is never holding this. The rooks come off, it's over. White will be tortured forever. Because this is just a tall pawn, and you must, when we put the knight on c6, that bishop, it's difficult for the bishop to move. We keep it a pawn. And we trade off the rooks, bring our king up, and, we attack the pawn. If we can't win the pawn, that's fine. We slow play it. Maybe expand a little bit, try to create another weakness on the other side of the board. Very easy, very fun. Okay, you know what? Let's say that you're really not into any of that. Instead, let's say that you're like, you know what? I really want to play knight f6. By the way, bishop b4, not mentioned. Bishop e7 is also a move here. Very reasonable. Also played. Black also scores relatively okay with this small data size. It's kind of hard to say. Bishop b7 is a move, not mentioned. Knight d7, which is what I played for quite a while, not mentioned. Not as mentioned. It's like this isn't mentioned. It's because none of this is mentioned. Maybe it's the length of the video is the issue. But that's not a excuse for putting out poor quality that you constrained yourself to a certain time period. It had to be under 15 minutes, or else, God forbid, we give them good, useful stuff. That's what that sounds like to me. Well, let's say the knight f6. Knight f6, it's a fine move. There's actually nothing wrong with it. It's not my cup of tea, but, let's go with this. You get this kind of like French structure. And then he says, oh, man, you're going to really trick him up with this move. Knight g5. They trade off bishops, and what if they go here? I'm just going to go bishop e7, and I'm going to say your knight looks really stupid there. Hard to bring your queen in. Now, let's say that they've done their homework, even outside of it. They know g4, I think, it seems like something I thought someone would play, but it's just ugly. Now, of course, they can't go h4 because it's the free knight variation. so they have to go knight back, and then you can even play h5. This isn't like the top engine stuff, like h5. But this is, if they go g5, this is lost. But they don't know not to go g5. They don't know this. They don't know that this is strategically lost. They see space, but they don't understand position. They don't understand it. The key breakaways here is bishop g4, c5, knight c6. You put a knight on this square, and it attacks everything. You get a knight to f5, and just let it sit there, and eventually he'll drop a pawn. I'm talking strong players like National Masters, FIDE Masters. You get a position like this, you don't have to do anything. You can just move your king back and forth. They'll give you one of those pawns, I swear. Maybe a Grandmaster will. I don't know. I don't play Grandmasters. I'm not that strong. I play like National Masters and FIDE Masters. Maybe the National Master can sit there and hold forever, but like regular sort of like human players, this is lost. Engine gives -1, by the way. They don't know that. All these tricks and traps, and it's all garbage. Now, you know what? Let's follow. This is the engine's recommended move here. It really wants to go all in on this attack. g6. Now, your opponent's super booked up. He's going to play the best engine move here. Bishop to f4, h4. And you can see, now that I've told you, where do we want our knight? We want it to probably come over here. One of the things that really bothers me is the piece placement that the Remote Chess Academy sort of expects your opponents to do. They expect your opponents to play something awful. If I were to give, I don't know, let's say like castles, where do you think this bishop should go? Should it go on g7? Or do you think it should go maybe here and do something? Well, it makes sense to me to go here. I don't know why we're going g7. The Remote Chess Academy needs you to go bishop g7 because the bishop's misplaced on g7. In this structure, it's almost always better to go to e7. And in some sort of way, if you think about it, we've pushed both of these pawns, so it can be very easy for us to develop an attack on the king side. We haven't committed our king yet. Our king can stay, so there's two places where the king can be happy, okay? On the queen side, castled, or more likely in the Caro. If you can get the king, I know that blunders a knight, to this square right here, to d7, it's almost untouchable. It's stupid. It's just stupid safe there. So there's a really cool game with Alireza Firouzja where he walked his king over to the queen side like this. But this is what's recommended. I mean, this is what the engine does. You know what? Let's say I don't like bishop f5. I really want to go into the stuff that's recommended by the Remote Chess Academy with the black pieces. Fair enough, fair enough, fair enough. Let's follow through all the way down the rabbit hole with his line. Well, only pretty much one move doesn't lose on the spot, and that's g6. Queen h6. So queen h6. Bishop to here. All stuff that he mentions, and then he says here, and he pretty much says, now your opponent's going to go bishop g7. Just going over why would you go bishop g7? And it's been played. It was played before. I mean, a 2600 played it. It's madness. It's just bishop e7. At least the bishop's doing something over here. Like, we're not worried about this. This just loses on the spot. Knight f8. Oops. Like, what is this? So you know what the engine's recommended move here is? The engine says the best white can do is draw. This is what Stockfish 16 recommends for white. It says, hey, you know what? Best he can do is draw. But let's just say that he's not into that. You know what I mean? He's like, you know what? I don't want to do that. Well, here's more tricks and traps. He can go queen h4, and then boom, he can lose the piece because he's self-pinned. Now, I'm not a scumbag like that. Let's look at a game. There was queen g4 was an independent try that was tried once by a 2291 in 2015. Now, what do you think you should do here? It shows h6, but if you just break down the fundamentals of what you should do, there should be a move that's screaming to you. It's not h6. Just c5. c5, absolutely. We want to break down. I want to take this e5 pawn with tempo. Want to sort of remove the defender over here and say, hey, you know what? You've moved your queen a lot. And since you've moved your queen a lot, I'm going to start attacking your center, and it's hard for you to defend it. So knight b5 is bad. Why is knight b5 bad? Because this looks maybe a little unpleasant. So, he's not doing that. Well, maybe Stockfish recommends, says that the only move here for white to stay in the game and to be slightly worse, the only move where white is only -5, knight takes. Now, let's assume that your opponent is super prepared and he's ready to go into this, and somehow he finds the knight sack where he can be slightly worse forever. Down a piece. Just take it. e5. There's one key thing that you need to understand about attacking and defending. When your opponent sacrifices a piece and they're all in on the attack, the key thing that you can do is just return material. Okay? Return material and focus, prioritize development. Another thing that you want to do too is you want to count your opponent's attackers compared to your defenders. So the pieces around your king, okay, your opponent's pieces. If your opponent has more pieces attacking your king than you have defending it, there's a chance they have a real attack. If there's an even, or if you have more pieces around your king than they have attacking, the chances are there's no attack. And unfortunately for white here, even though this is what Stockfish recommends in this position as his best try, he has no attack. I recommend the engine wants to do f takes e6, just castle. If he goes here, give the exchange. Now you have 2 pieces for the exchange, you've returned material. Stockfish says that this is the best move. Knight f6, and this is bad. Now, I think the most human move here is just castles, get the king into the center, but this starts to look really bad really fast. All of a sudden, white's almost paralyzed because he has nowhere to really do. He still has development issues. This bishop's still awful, and not just being down 2 pieces for the rook, he's also just down a pawn. Like, this big center pawn is important, and it sort of stifles all of his play. But you know what? Let's say that your opponent again finds the best engine move, and he finds, I don't think that this is a very normal move. The engine wants bishop takes c5. I don't care. You can do that. That's fine. I just think just developing is fine. Knight c6, knight d7 is fine. The idea to sort of put all your pieces in the center. You have more pieces than your opponent. We don't care about pawns. Who cares? Like, what if he goes here? I don't care. Don't care about any of that. I care about getting my pieces on active squares. The engine wants a5 to undermine this, but even this is fine. Even this is fine. He wants to put the bishop on the long diagonal. I don't care. I want to get my pieces as active as possible. You do that and you're going to crush your opponents. I'm giving you real chess advice instead of this bogus garbage that they're giving. What if they take the knight here? What do you think? I think knight takes is fine. You just want to go knight f6, it helps to defend, it attacks, maybe get a knight e5, c takes d5, get your rooks involved. It's a bad day at the office. So in this exact position, white is minus 0.4. If he finds the move castles, everything else is -1. Everything else. It's a bad day at the office. This whole thing is just a bad day at the office. And his best move here is to do this. It's hard to understand why this is recommended. If pretty much white should take the draw. And if he doesn't take the draw, and if he tries to fight for something that's just not there, then he can end up getting crushed. He will end up getting crushed. And it just a few basic principles. If you don't overreact to your opponent's attack, just smoothly, you're going to just crush him. This knight on c3 is terrible. Just staring into the... It wants to be useful, but it's just never useful on c3. He really wishes he could get in the c4 break, but he can't because the knight's on c3. I don't know. These videos that are like, oh, you can crush. Even I've showed you all the ways to avoid these lines. And it goes as far back as the first move once you get into, the name of the opening, just the two knights. As far back as knight f6 just avoids all of this. This never mentioned. It just scores pretty well. If you want a video on knight f6, you'll have to let me know. I have it all the way down. In 2017, there were some engine lines. I've worked through those. It's been hard, and it's sort of like my secret weapon that I'm waiting to unleash upon some poor unsuspecting soul. If you want it, you have to let me know. But there's just nothing here. Even when we fall for all the traps, with the exception of giving him mate in 1, there's nothing there. We follow these lines, knight d7. There's nothing here. It's remarkable to me that he just gives bishop to g4 and then rants about winning from this position and says that he's better because black blundered. He has 2 blunders, and then he has some obscure, weird stuff that just no one's playing. I think he had like some sort of like bishop f5 stuff. It's like, no one's playing this. Who's playing this? For one, like, this isn't comfortable. It doesn't make any sense, and it's not in the spirit of the opening. Like, I guess I could see in like a bullet game or something like that, maybe you could run into this, or like a super blitz game, you're like, hey, you know what, I just want to get my pieces out and don't want to think. Maybe. It's hard to say. He doesn't even mention, what if something terrible like e6 is played? It's not terrible. It's not losing. The database white's won every single game that's been played in this, but it's never mentioned. And if your average audience is like 600, 700, 800, and they run into this and they don't know what to do, and your opponent understands the structure better, you can lose, because, they can go knight d7, b6, bishop to b7, bishop to d2, castles, c5. And these sort of like ideas, they sort of like flow. By the way, e6 was played by Jan Nepomniachtchi, so not the dumbest thing in the world, but not my cup of tea. It wouldn't be my first choice. But it's never mentioned. It just bothers me, man.